Okay, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, August 21st, 2014, in the years beyond Thunderdome, and interesting articles. One of these articles I'm going to talk to you today about is 2 years old, but it feeds into the other, which is much more recent, because we're going to be talking about GMOs and geopolitics, okay? Now, the article that's 2 years old is entitled, titled, "In a Surprising Contradiction, Nestle Official Says GMOs Aren't Necessary." This is the 2-year-old article. It was sent to me by one of the regulars on the website. And I want to read a couple things here because they dovetail directly into what we're going to be talking about with the second article. The article states, quote, and we're citing here a Nestle's official by the name of Hans Jör, that's J-O with an umlaut H-R. Herr Jör says this: genetically modified food is unnecessary to feed the world, and the food industry would reap more benefits from using resources more sustainably and employing other techniques. That's the view of Hans Jör, corporate head of sustainable agriculture at Nestle and honorary president of SIA Platform, a group of top global food and drink manufacturers working to improve supply chain sustainability, writes Rod Addy for Food Navigator. Now, later on in this article, I'm skipping a couple of paragraphs here. Listen to this. Quote, and this is Hans Jör himself talking. Quote, I don't think GMOs have contributed or will likely contribute much to food security. Most of the GMO traits are focused on pest and herbicide resistance, which is arguably a good thing, but are not improving yield characteristics all that much, at least compared to conventional breeding, or better yet, maker-assisted breeding. Now, let me stop right there because he's made a profound admission that if GMO manufacturers were concerned about feeding and increasing world population, they would have engineered or attempted to engineer their products for higher yield per acre. That's what they did not do. All right. So, in other words, this is kind of a backhanded admission of what the anti-GMO lobby has been saying all along. This is more about corporate profits and gaining control of the food supply. But now to continue, pardon me, with his comment, he says this, quote, furthermore, there are other approaches to managing pests and weeds that would be equally or more effective, like not planting such large monocultures in the first place, unquote. Now, this was not Hans Jör, this was Jonathan Foley making these remarks. Now, that's also another criticism of GMOs, the constant use of the same field to plant the same thing over and over and over. And this, of course, is totally contrary to the type of farming that I grew up with, where they would rotate crops, let certain fields lie fallow for a year, and then rotate crops in and out of various fields. Now, here's an interesting statement by Hans Jör himself. He says, quote, we, that is to say Nestle, have a very simple way of looking at genetic modification. Listen to what the consumer wants. If they don't want it in products, you don't put it in them, unquote. Jör told Food Navigator. Except, the funny thing is, no one seemed to have clued Nestle USA in on that stance. According to the records kept by the California Secretary of State, Nestle USA made 4 separate donations to the No on Coalition 37, fighting against the labeling of GMO ingredients in California. In a 7-week period, the company gave nearly $1.17 million to prevent the measure from passing, unquote. Now, that refers back, of course, to the 2012 election in the United States. In the state of California, there was a proposition number 37 on the ballot that wanted the state to enact GMO labeling laws, tougher GMO labeling. and Nestle was a contributor. Now, all that's fine and dandy because what it's an admission is that GMOs are not about increasing productivity, and they are more about gaining control of a food supply. Now, with that in mind, I've been arguing, as many of you know, over several years, actually, about 3 to 4 years, that the real story behind GMOs, in my opinion, is ultimately going to become geopolitical because you're going to see, I believe, I've been arguing for quite some time, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, eventually make GMOs a geopolitical issue. And more recently, I argued that one of the first steps they're going to do is they're going to have to put in some sort of agreed upon international system of regulation and standards amongst themselves if they're going to be able to make GMOs a successful geopolitical issue. And that means that, first of all, you're going to have to look at the domestic policies of agriculture producers within that bloc, particularly Russia and China. Brazil and India, of course, India seems to be caving on the GMO issue, but Russia is interesting, as I've been indicating in many ways and in many blogs. This is an article that appeared on Russia Today, and the article is about the government, the Russian government, appointing and approving fines for improper GMO labeling. Listen to this in the context of my hypothesis that we might be watching the emergence of GMOs as a geopolitical issue. Quote, the bill has been drafted by the State Consumer Rights Agency, Rospotrebnadzor, and concerns all food and beverage products containing specifically genetically modified organisms or their parts, or which are made using such organisms. Entrepreneurs who fail to put markings on the products they sell or distort the information will be fined between 20,000 and 150,000 rubles, or the equivalent of 555 to 4,150 American dollars. Control bodies can also confiscate the improperly marked stock. Russian legislators and officials from the Agriculture Ministry have previously complained that the regulations concerning the turnover of GMO products lacked proper enforcement and suggested a temporary ban on all genetically altered products in the country. Other government agencies, including Rospotrebnadzor, argued that since Russia joined the WTO in 2012, trade restrictions can be imposed only after the hazardous effects of the banned goods are scientifically proven. They also quoted the statistics reading that the share of GMO in Russian food industry, listen closely folks, had declined from 12% to just 0.01% over the past 10 years, and there are just 57 registered food products containing GMOs in the country. Nevertheless, most of the Russian lawmakers are pushing for changing the existing law on safety and quality of alimentary products by inducing a norm set for the maximum allowed content of transgenic and genetically modified components. The motion's initiators want to make this norm 0 for all foodstuffs produced in Russia. That's huge, folks, because that means insofar as any Russian agricultural products might be exported, they would be what we would call simply natural, organic, heirloom produced products. This isn't to say they wouldn't be using pesticides and so on, but it is to say that those products would be rather more free of GMOs. All right, that's huge. In February this year, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev held a government session dedicated to the problem, in which he said that Russia will create its own research base for genetically modified organisms that would provide the authorities with expert information and allow for future legislative movements and executive decisions. All right. Now, as far as I'm concerned, folks, what you're looking at is a first step, again taken by Russia, to secure its own agricultural domestic food supply and policy free of the dependency on Western agribusiness companies like Nestle, like Monsanto, like DuPont, Archer Daniel, Midlands, European companies like Syngenta, Bayer, and so on. So, in other words, Russia is starting to clean up its own domestic agriculture. And we've seen those similar bans on GMOs, specific targeted GMO products by China. So I suspect, again, you're looking at small steps being taken by the BRICS nations. It's going to be interesting to see now if this evolves into an international agreement of standards by those countries. India is the one that is wobbling and caving more to Western pressure to allow GMOs in return for nuclear technology transfer. Now, let's look at that for a moment, because India doesn't need Western nuclear technology. It certainly would like it because it's more up to date and more efficient. But India could easily turn to China or Russia, or for that matter, to Brazil, to get some of its nuclear technology. So it will be something to watch in India's case to see if indeed they begin to pull away from this pro-GMO position that they have seemed to cave into in the last few months. I do believe that we're still going to see something from the BRICS nations as a bloc regarding the issue of GMOs. But this is going to take time. Domestic policy decisions have to be made first, and you're going to see Russia and China lead that. Once they get their own regulation and policy sorted out, I think you're going to see Brazil slowly start to come online, and I think you're going to start to see South Africa. And the reason they're going to be slow is they're going to have to slowly taper off their dependency on those big agribusiness companies. So this might be something to watch. Russia is signaling by the mention of the World Trade Organization and their membership in it that they might be getting ready to make this an issue at that level and in that institution. As you know, the BRICS nations have been pressing for a more balanced voice in the IMF, in the WTO, and this could be yet another part of that intricate foreign policy geopolitical game that Mr. Putin and his advisors in Russia might be playing. So this is definitely something to watch, folks. There was so much this week I had to choose from in terms of different stories that I might talk about, but look for some of them in the week's coming blogs. We do have a members vid chat tomorrow night, so I hope to see all the regulars there. We're already starting to get questions. So that's it for this week's news and views from the Nefarium, everybody. I'm Joseph P. Farrell. We'll see you on the flip side, and God bless.